Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Derrick Pitts, Chief Astronomer at the Franklin Institute Science Museum, your cool astronomer, welcoming you back for the November edition of Night Skies at Home. Night Skies at Home is the Franklin Institute's program that takes us all out to take a look at the night sky, provide information that we can use to help us connect with the night sky, and lots of other associated science concepts and items and articles as well. I have to get my lips together here to make everything work, but welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you've been with us before, you know what our program is all about. If you're just joining us for the first time, Franklin Institute Science Museum for many years has run a program called Night Skies at the Observatory. Night Skies at the Observatory is a regular monthly program in which we invite guests to come into the observatory or come into the museum and take advantage of all the different assets and programs that we have that we can point to astronomy. We have a wonderful rooftop observatory. We have a great planetarium, and we put together a number of different science programs and activities in support of helping you learn to better connect with the night sky. So since we've been in quarantine since early March, we've been doing this regular program live on Facebook, in which we provide a lot of the same information, but try to get you what you need to go outside to connect to the night sky. We give you information that's easy for you to use, easy for you to put together with other information you already have, so that you can have a great experience outside under the night sky. Here we are now in November, and as we find ourselves in November, we've had some seasonal change come upon us already. We've seen the time change at the end of the month. And all of these things put together help us because this brings darkness earlier and gives us more time to observe the evening sky. And as it turns out, we have an added bonus this year because those of us here in the Philadelphia area are enjoying these really wonderfully warm temperatures this late into the season. You know, it's projected to be in the high 60s and low 70s for like the next 5 days. And so that means it won't be cold outside at night. That means you'll be able to go out in the evening and take a look into the evening sky for some great constellations, some great planetary viewing, and even coming up in the next 2 weeks, some great satellite viewing as well. And that's going to be part of our program tonight. We're going to talk about satellites, but we're going to talk about an interesting aspect of satellites. I have a guest with me this evening that's going to join me a little bit later, and we're going to talk about the end of the life of a satellite, what happens then, and what happens when you have a lot of satellites in the sky together, and they're all just about to come down from the sky. We'll talk about orbital decay and things like that, but it's the question of what happens when satellites collide in space. What could be the end point or the end result of a lot of satellites colliding together? So we'll talk about that. You'll find it really exciting because you've actually seen some of these scenarios play out in certain movies, certain science fiction movies you may have seen. So we'll talk about that too. But in the meantime, before we get there, we have a lot of other things we have to do, some regular astronomical monthly housekeeping that we have to take care of. And we want to make sure you have all the information you need going into November so you can enjoy a great evening outside under a beautiful starry sky. The information that we provide, by the way, is useful no matter where you're observing from. If you live in a downtown urban environment where there's plenty of light at night, city lights around that you think might inhibit your ability to view, the objects that we speak of are visible to the naked eye, even in a center city environment. And if you live out further away from city lights where the sky is darker, of course, there's plenty for you to see, and we'll give you some targets as well that will work for you. So this covers everybody. You don't have to be an expert to do this. That's not what this is about. This is about adding information to the package of information you already carry with you about the night sky. You probably know more about the night sky than you realize, and what we're going to do is add a few pieces to help fill that out and provide a context for you so that when you step outside in the evening, you'll be comfortable looking up and identifying targets in the night sky. Of course, the other thing that's really cool to do is invite your family members out with you to do this. You know, right now, we're still in a situation where social distancing is really very important. Maybe the most important message that I can give you tonight is wear a mask, please. And please observe social distancing. But here's a really cool activity that you can do with your family, with your little bubble unit. You can do this activity in the evening while the temperatures are nice and warm. And it gives you an opportunity to maybe, I don't know, relax a little bit, have a moment of serenity, a moment of calm as you reconnect with the evening sky. And, you know, as we all look up into the evening sky, we see different things that we like or appeal to us. But looking up into the evening sky can often bring you that sense of calm and relaxation. And so we invite you to take advantage of that and use some of the information that we provide tonight to make that experience a good one. And also invite your friends, invite your family to go out with you. This is also an activity that you can share with your family across distance. So, you know, if you're here in Philadelphia and you're observing planets in the evening sky, you know, your cousin out in California will be able to see the same thing. So you can share that experience across this distance, even though maybe you and some other family member may not be able to be together. This might be a way for you to be together under astronomy, under a night sky. So as I said, we have lots of interesting things we have to do this evening. So we're going to talk about what's available to be seen in the sky, the moon, the planets, stars, constellations, things like that. We'll talk about NASA launches coming up soon, or space launches coming up soon that you might find interesting that you'll want to follow. Also, we'll talk about visibility of International Space Station. That's going to be a key to this because we'll want you to connect this information that will bring you about colliding satellites with objects like International Space Station. And of course, most important, more important than anything else, we want your questions. Please send us your questions. Use the chat to send us your questions about astronomy, about the night sky, anything related to that. We'll try to answer your questions this evening. And if we can't get to your question while we're in this program, I'll be online later to answer your question for you. So if you have any questions about anything we're going to talk about here tonight, anything else that comes to mind related to this, be sure to send it in. We want to answer your question. Also, guess what? I have to do this again. It's November. We're about, 2 months away from the holiday season. And we've talked about this before. If you're thinking about an astronomy or space-related holiday gift, now is the time you ought to be looking for that gift. Why? Because you want to get it ordered early, because you're probably not going to go to a store for it. You're going to order it online. So you need to get in line right now online so that you can get your gift before it's sold out or you have any shipping problems or anything like that. So we'll cover a little bit of that too. Wow, so much we have to do. Don't forget your questions. All right, so let's get started with our usual information about the night sky. We'll talk about sunrise, sunset, some timing things there, the moon, a few other things like that, and then we'll jump into our conversation with our guest this evening. Okay, so let's get started. Let's do our sky phenomenon. First of all, things have really changed. I know you've noticed it by now. Sunrises have changed their time along with sunsets because of that 1 hour shift. But guess what? The other thing is this. Sunrises are now coming at 6:35 in the morning at this latitude, around Philadelphia latitude, and sunset comes at 4:53 in the afternoon. Wow, we've crossed the 5 o'clock mark. Sunset is coming before 5 p.m. Yeah, well, that's been helped by the fact that we turned the clocks back an hour, so that also helped that along. And that's a good thing because it shifts the time for us in a way that gives us a little bit more sunlight in the early morning hours. If we didn't shift time, 8 o'clock in the morning, it would still be dark in the winter. So we shift time around a little bit, and that helps us a little bit as we make our way through the year. So right now, sunset, as I said, is running at sunrise is running at 6:35 in the morning, and sunset is coming at 4:53 in the afternoon. So here's what you want to look for with sunrise and sunset. Sunrise is going to continue to come later and later and later through the rest of the year. Sunset is going to continue to come earlier and earlier, but here's an interesting twist, only until early December. Then a very interesting thing happens. There's a dwell in the sunset change times that lasts for a couple of weeks, and then sunsets begin to come later before Christmas. We'll talk about that next month because it's a really interesting mechanical thing about the Earth's orbit around the sun. I'm sure you'll find fascinating, but that's what's going to happen with those right now. We've lost 4 hours and 49 minutes of daylight since the summer solstice. So since June 21st, we've already lost almost 5 hours of daylight, and more to come as we head toward the winter solstice in mid to late December. So we'll get to that, but that's what you should be aware of. Those sunsets are going to continue to come earlier. So the moon, where's the moon right now? The moon today is at waning gibbous phase. The moon is 19 days old in its cycle, and tonight it rises at 8:30 p.m. It'll set tomorrow morning or just after noon tomorrow at 12:02 p.m. So if you go outside in the morning tomorrow, you'll be able to see the moon high in the western sky around 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's an interesting opportunity for you to see the moon during the day. Many people think you can't see the moon during the day, but in fact, you can actually see the moon in the sky almost every day of its entire cycle, except for those points when the moon is close to the sun in the daytime sky. And that's either very, very late in its phasing or very, very early after the new moon starts. So if you go out and take a look tomorrow, it'll be an interesting sight for you to see the moon in a clear blue sky in the morning over on the western side of the sky. New moon comes on the 14th this month, by the way. So that's just in another week or so, we'll have new moon. And then first quarter comes on the 21st of the month, and then full moon comes on the 30th of the month. So full moon is very late again, just like it was late in October. But this month, we don't have two full moons in the month like we had last month. So here we are with just one full moon this month. So get out and make sure you take a look at that. Waning gibbous phase is getting down toward the last quarter phase. So the moon will be rising later and later and later every night. And that's the reason why you'll see it in the morning sky over on the western side of the sky as it completes its cycle around the Earth. Planets in the sky that we can see, really great planets. Jupiter and Saturn are still there, still glowing over in the southwestern portion of the sky. And Mars is well up in the south by 9 p.m. You've probably already seen Mars. If you were outside looking at the evening sky over toward the eastern side or maybe the southeastern portion of the sky, and you saw an object fairly bright, glowing with a sort of pinkish tint to it, and you wondered what that might be, I'm going to guess you thought it was Mars, and you were right. I really urge you to get a good look at Mars as it appears right now. It's nice and bright, the color is striking, it's easy to see, no binoculars necessary. And the reason why I say this is a great time to look at it is because if you spend a couple of days or a couple of weeks, every opportunity you have a clear sky to get a look at Mars, you don't really need to spend much time, just a couple of minutes each time. You'll learn to recognize exactly what Mars looks like in the sky. And that's a good thing because no other object looks like Mars in the evening sky. I mean, think about it. None of the other planets are red or pink like Mars is. Venus isn't. We know Venus is brilliant white, so that makes it recognizable in that right of its color. Jupiter and Saturn, well, Jupiter looks sort of creamy colored and is not as bright as Mars is. Saturn is much dimmer and a little bit yellower. So none of the other planets have this distinctive color that Mars does. And you can even tell the difference between a red star and a red planet very simply. Stars twinkle, planets don't. Very easy. Stars twinkle, planets don't. So if you're observing Mars in the evening sky and it happens to be near a red star, you can tell the difference between the two because the star will twinkle and Mars won't. So that way you can easily discern which is which. So this is a great time to learn once and for all what the planet Mars looks like in the evening sky. If you get this together right now, this time while it's visible, you'll be able to recognize Mars anytime, anywhere. Doesn't matter if it's this year, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you'll always know what it looks like. Cool thing about that is you can share that experience with others and help them experience the kind of joy that comes from being able to identify a planet in the sky. All right, so those are some cool things to look at. We're going to come back and we'll do a star map a little bit later and look at where the constellations are relative to Mars and the other planets. It's a good time to do that because the constellations of the late summer and the early fall sky really lay out the location in the sky where we can find those planets according to this very, very special band of stars we find across the sky. So we'll get to that just a little bit later. And of course, as I mentioned before, International Space Station, We'll talk about that too as we go on a little bit later in our program. But right now, what I'd love to do is I'd like to get right to the main topic of our program this evening. Now, don't forget, we want your questions. You know what? Hold on just a second, Ken. Let me take a break and see if we have any questions.
We do. Michelle would like to know, what does it mean when you see the moon in the daylight?
Ah, Michelle, thank you for your question, Michelle. Michelle wants to know, what does it mean when you see the moon in full daylight? Well, you know, the moon has this orbit around the Earth, actually, Michelle, that allows us to see it almost every day. I mentioned this just a few minutes ago, and often we don't associate seeing the moon with seeing it in the daytime sky. But if you think about how the moon orbits the Earth, what happens is the moon rises about 45 minutes, 40 to 50 minutes later every night. Well, that sort of steps it in its orbit around the Earth. And if you see where the moon is in the sky, let's say tomorrow morning, and then look again on Saturday morning, you'll see the shift in the moon's position from one day to the next, as long as you're observing at the same time. And that shift that you see marks 1/29th of the moon's orbit around the Earth. Now, because it steps around like that, 1/29th or so every day, that means that the moon is going to appear in the sky at some point as it's completing its orbit around the Earth, heading back to its new position as we see it in the sky when it reaches that new point. So what it means is you have a great opportunity to follow the motion of the moon as it orbits around the Earth every day. What's next?
All right. Lori says, how do blood moons form?
Laurie, thank you for your question. How do blood moons form? Well, that's kind of a special condition. Have you ever seen a total lunar eclipse, Laurie? If you haven't seen a total lunar eclipse yet, you need to see one. And the reason why, of course, is because it's this really cool phenomenon where the moon passes into the Earth's shadow. And what actually happens is the way the sunlight comes around the Earth and falls onto the surface of the moon causes the moon to take on color. And that color can be anywhere from a very, very light tan all the way into a deep brick red. Now, the term blood moon, oh boy, this is the part of astronomy that sometimes gets me right by the neck. It's a marketing ploy, actually. The term blood moon is a term that was created by an author who wanted to sell a series of books about lunar eclipses. So he used the term blood moon because he wanted to accentuate the color of the moon when it's in this deep red kind of coloration. And of course, what sounds more intriguing? Brick red moon or blood moon? Okay, maybe that wasn't such a good impression, but you get the idea. It's perfect for Halloween, you know, the blood red moon. Yeah, so that's what that really is. There's no real term for the moon like that, blood moon. There's nothing really. That's just a marketing term. But you got to see a total lunar eclipse. You can look it up online. You can find it really easily. And once you have that experience, you'll understand what we mean about the color. What's next, Linda?
Patty would like to know, why do we call the full moon in November the beaver moon?
Ha 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 ha. Thank you very much. Patty wanted to know, why do we call the full moon in November the beaver moon? Full moons, let's do it this way. First Nations peoples here in the Americas have come up with a series of words that describe the full moon of every month. And those names typically refer to some aspect about the natural environment connected to the moon for that full moon of the month. Now, this is a really easy way to divide the year into sections that are easily recognizable for one reason or another. So the September moon that happens closest to the autumnal equinox is always known as the harvest moon. The moon following that, the full moon of October, is typically known as the hunter's moon. And of course, the harvest moon refers to agriculture. The hunter's moon refers to a sidelight of agriculture, actually, when hunters might be out in a field early in the evening using the light of the moon to hunt game. And then we come to November with the beaver moon. And so all of these names relate to something about the natural environment that connect back to the moon. And so that's the reason why. Now, I said that First Nations peoples have given these moon names, but there are a lot of different moon names, different sets of moon names as there were so many different societies, First Nation societies here in the Americas, there are lots of different sort of moon names for each full moon of the year. So if you do a little bit of research, Patty, you'll find that these names are all really interesting, and they're all related to some aspect of the natural environment. So it's really cool to find out that there are these names. One last one, Linda.
Yes, Pleasant. Will there be a time when solar eclipses will not be possible?
Pleasant asks the question, will there ever be a time when solar eclipses will not be possible? Oh, yes, yes, that time is coming. It is on its way, Pleasant, but it won't be tomorrow. I think it's if I remember off the top of my head, it's a few million years out. You know, the moon is slowly orbiting farther and farther away from the Earth. And as this does so, it changes the geometry of the Sun, Earth, Moon system such that solar eclipses will eventually stop happening. So for right now, Pleasant, we don't have to worry so much because solar eclipses will certainly continue to happen for the next tens of thousands of years. And so for, let's go for the next 500 years, I think we're pretty good on solar eclipses. But that's a really interesting aspect of the mechanics of the Earth-Moon system that people often don't know very much about, but the moon is slowly orbiting further and further away from Earth, and that will eventually get rid of the solar eclipses. Make sure you see one. You've got to see a total solar eclipse before you get off of this planet. There's one assignment for everybody. Lunar eclipses, fairly easy. Total solar eclipses, a little bit harder, but definitely worth the effort. So make sure you see one before they disappear in the next few million years. All right, great, thanks. We'll come back and we'll do some more questions later. But now what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring our guest on board who's going to work with us tonight to help us understand about what happens when satellites collide. Ken MacLeod is an engineering manager who, and just a second, let me make sure I get this right, Ken. Ken is actually from the Philadelphia area. He's a Philadelphia native. He earned his BA in liberal arts from Ursinus, a BS in electrical engineering with computer science emphasis from Penn. Did I get that right, Ken?
Perfect.
Yeah, very good. And a master's in the same field from Stanford. He actually has 4 patents. And Ken is a member of IEEE, and he also gave a presentation recently to the, let me see if I can get it correct, Ken, the American Institute for Aeronautics and Astronautics. And his presentation was all about what happens to satellites when they begin to collide in space, when we have too many satellites in orbit. What happens if they start to collide with each other? There's some really, really intriguing aspects of this, and Ken is going to help us understand this. And this is really an intriguing thing for us to know a bit about, because since the beginning of the space age, it's been wonderful to make use of the near-Earth orbit platform to provide all sorts of services for Earth. But one of the things that we've overlooked is, what do we do when we get too many satellites in orbit and they begin to collide? It's a very interesting phenomenon that happens from that, and Ken's going to help us understand that. So Ken, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to Night Skies at Home.
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here, Derek.
So Ken, I was really intrigued when I found out that you had given these presentations, because what it said to me was that here's a phenomenon that while we have some awareness of, it really is something serious that we ought to consider. So why don't we start, Ken, first with understanding what the state of affairs is in terms of satellites in orbit, how many satellites there are out there, a little bit about what they do, and we'll get around to what happens when they come to the end of their life. So you have a few slides you'd like to show us that might help us get a grip on this.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, there's certainly, this is an amazingly different time that's come along where individual companies can now launch a lot of satellites, and they're going to do it, and we'll see why here in a minute. I'm gonna share my screen here, okay, and see if that's the right thing.
While Ken's getting this together, he's joining us from Southern California, so from Orange County. And Ken, I don't know if your weather is better out there than ours is here. I'm gonna go with our weather here.
Oh, I think so. We're about to have rain this weekend. It looks like it's going to be 50 degrees. And you folks are doing great out there. So
Yeah, absolutely.
there we are. Well, so this is a presentation that, as you say, Derek, that I gave last month at a local AIAA meeting, and it was done in collaboration with my occasional partner in these things, Dr. James Martin, who has a lot more of an aerospace background than I do. But we asked ourselves 4 questions because people have been saying everything's going to be okay with these large number of satellites. So you see that first question. So how many satellites are going to be in these new internet constellations? We've all heard about Starlink, but that's only one of 4 or 5 of these. And the answer is quite a lot. And then how many of those satellites are going to be decaying downward? When they run out of lifetime or when they fail in orbit, they start to decay downward because there's a little bit of tenuous atmosphere in low Earth orbit, and it slowly brings them spiraling downward and downward and downward towards re-entry into the atmosphere. And the third question is, are they going to cause trouble for the safety of the International Space Station, which I gather you talk about in this iconic show a fair amount, or its replacements or other high-value satellites that might be at risk. And then if we need to do something about it, what is it that we need to do about it?
So Ken, before you go on, a couple of things. First of all, when you talk about how they might impact the safety of International Space Station, well, that's one thing. But I'm worried about whether or not a satellite's going to come plowing into the Earth's atmosphere and hit me as I'm walking down the street. That's number one. So I want to understand a little bit about that. But let's go back and talk for a moment about a constellation of satellites. I think, our audience is familiar with individual satellites being used for various kinds of things like Earth observation and in climate, monitoring and, photographic exercises and spy satellites and things like that. But let's talk about what a constellation is. Let's do the SpaceX Starlink constellation, for example. How would we describe that?
Well, the key is that what the function of it is. And the function is that they've decided it would be very valuable to have satellites available nearby in the sky anytime we'd like to use them to do high-speed internet access. And so anywhere you are on the Earth, even out in the middle of a desert, even out in the middle of an iceberg, you'd be able to have internet access very effectively. And exactly for the same reason that there are more than 100,000 of the towers for mobile phones in the United States, so that when you hold up your phone, it's always close to one of those towers and you have good radio connections. They need to have a lot of satellites, so there's always one that's close to you when you use your somewhat bigger antenna for this and point it up in the sky. There's always one nearby. And for many years, there have been other constellations. For example, we all use GPS for navigation, and GPS is a constellation of a bunch of different satellites. And they tend to be in rings. All these constellations tend to be in rings for ease of maintenance and ease of putting them up.
Cool. Okay, so are we talking about 10 satellites or 50 satellites or 100 satellites?
Well, a really big constellation in the past has been like Iridium, like 77 satellites, and it caused people to gasp. It was so big. But here we'll see in a moment that some of these individual companies are asking for more than 40,000 satellites each.
Wow, that's a lot. Are these big objects size of a washing machine, larger or smaller?
Larger, mostly. They need to be able to reach out with quite a bit of radio power, so they have good size solar cells. And
okay, well that's good. Let's go on.
So that first question we asked was how many satellites are there going to be in total, and we were kind of surprised at how big it turned out to be, which is why the presentation got made. So that the total so far is around 100,000 satellites, and most all these outfits say they want more. And
wow.
So, yeah, that's just what we said. That's very, very intuitive.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
So we all know SpaceX, and they've asked the FCC for 42,000 of them. You see, these are all the numbers that come from the FCC. If you want to broadcast in America with a big radio transmitter, you need to talk to the FCC and get permission. So that's where all these numbers come from. OneWeb is a company that's in Britain, and it recently has been bought by 2 companies. One half of it was bought by the government of Great Britain. So this is a half government company now, and they're asking for 48,000. Jeff Bezos of great fame from Amazon has a project called Kuiper. It's
Mhm.
asking for a few thousand. Boeing's asking for a few thousand. And I picked two more of them. There are a couple others besides these, but Telesat and Leosat are only asking for a couple hundred each, but they've already told everybody that they're planning to go bigger. They just haven't gotten around to it yet. So that's what sort of makes this a concern, is about how many satellites there really are going to be.
So Ken, can you also help us set a little bit more of a context? Because, I mean, it's not like there aren't any satellites up there already. There are quite a few objects in orbit around Earth already.
Yeah, so there are more than 2,000 active satellites in orbit, and there are more than 3,000 satellites that are retired satellites in orbit. And then, of course, there's a lot of space junk. There's many, many pieces of space junk.
Oh, and that's the term that I think people have really heard more than any other when we talk about this is space junk.
You referred to at least one movie that showed that very dramatically. So.
Oh yes, oh yes. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Go ahead, Ken.
So they're going up very fast too, and it seems like it was important to recognize that they're going up very fast. Here's a picture that's from SpaceX of 60 of their Starlink rockets going up on the Falcon 9. Falcon 9 is a fairly modest size and cost rocket, but you see these are very flat, and as you look at them, you can see there's a stack, one stacked on top of the other, and they've shown the ability to launch 2 stacks of 60 of these in a month, and they think they can do it almost every month. They're up to about 800 satellites so far. I don't know if you've talked to us about seeing these satellites in orbit, but they make a very interesting pattern sometimes in the sky when they're launched. Have you talked about that on previous shows?
Well, we talked a little bit about it, but we haven't been too explicit, only because of the difficulty that some people might have seeing them in a near urban environment.
But they're released all together, and they slowly spread out, and they form a string of pearls. That's kind of an interesting thing. There's sky observers. There's a group of sky observers who very much enjoys trying to see the string of pearls. So this is all very, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, that's a cool way to think of it, as a string of pearls. That makes it a little bit more interesting to try to get a look for. Go ahead.
Yeah. So here we are with this very large number that I've asked for, and a lot of them being produced. I didn't say it, that OneWeb has a high volume production manufacturing facility in Florida to be close to the spaceport so they can launch them faster.
Wow.
So this is all really happening. And this is all very good, I think. This is a really transformational opportunity. But the problem is there's some things about it people haven't thought so much. So are we ready to go on to the next one here, the worrisome part?
Let's do it.
Okay. So one of the problems that people worry about is that once these satellites either pass their lifetime, and here you see they have a lifetime of about 5 years, they have a limited amount of propellant to keep them in orbit, and they keep being slowed down by that tenuous atmosphere. And also some of them fail on orbit. They have a failure rate of perhaps 2% or so each year. These are small satellites. They don't have a lot of backups in them. They don't have, triple redundancy. And so when you look at the population, people have said there won't be many of these decaying because they'll all get swept up by the atmosphere. But because of the large numbers, that doesn't work anymore. It worked when we had small constellations. So with that total population of 100,000 in a lifetime of 5 years, that says every year 20,000 of them will reach the end of life and start heading downward. And they get a deorbit push. Each of these has a little thruster in it, a little ion engine thruster, and it gives it a little deorbit push, and then it takes about 8 months to decay, typically. But there's also a failure rate of 2%, and those, that says about 2,000 of them will fail each year, and those take about 3 years to decay because once it's failed, you can't tell it to give a deorbit push. It may have, at that point, it may have failed more or less completely. So the result of that, unlike any of these other constellations before, you would expect to see 20,000 satellites decaying at any time. And they're decaying into the kind of orbit. These start out above the space station and above some other very critical satellites. And so this is a concern of what will happen, whether they could hit one of those very big satellites.
So let me just go back, Ken, for 1 second and say, when you say decay and re-enter, I think you said that the original, sort of idea of this is that the satellite would come back into the Earth's atmosphere where it would burn up on re-entry, and we wouldn't have to worry very much about it striking anything or causing any damage because of that reason. And since 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered with water, and you can, ditch in the ocean essentially. But that's not something that can be considered because of this number of satellites you said.
Yes, so far as I know, there's no international rule that forces satellite launchers. These are about 570 pounds apiece, the Starlink ones. So they're not too small a size. You could give them a requirement, just as cars have so many requirements on them, that say when they re-enter, they can't have any piece that's larger than 6 ounces, or something like that. I'm not aware of that, and so it's possible there could be castings or things like that on occasions might reach the Earth.
Right. Okay.
And I certainly hope they don't hit you and me.
And that kind of thing has happened before. I guess the best known of all was Skylab that came down in the early Skylab came down in the 1970s, I think, if I remember correctly. And there was a fairly large chunk that did manage to reach the surface of the Earth out in Australia in the outback someplace and didn't cause any damage. And I think the other thing we want to add here, Ken, is that you mentioned that they start out above the orbit of International Space Station. So we're talking about above 220 miles up.
That's right. A lot of these are around 350 miles up.
Okay. All right. All right. So what's our next scenario?
Well, one of the things you need to ask is how much control you have of these. If you have a lot of control and they can zig and they can zag, then we can keep track of them and they can avoid any collisions. But it turns out it's not so good. After end of life, they have a little bit of ion propellant left. They don't use up quite all the propellant, but it's very low acceleration and it's a very small engine, and there's not much propellant. The good news is, though, is they may be responsive and transmitting an identification signal, so they're relatively easy to keep track of, I hope. The lower part here says, though, that after they fail on orbit, there's no guarantee they'll do anything. If the power supply fails and the computers are all turned off suddenly, then they can't evade any collisions, and they may be tumbling and unresponsive and not transmitting. So there's going to be a lot of them. They're going to be falling down through key orbits, and there's not much control. And those are the things we learned, that the not so good part of this, even though the constellations themselves are pretty terrific. And so here is a picture we put in of the International Space Station, which you've probably shown folks before, to remind how complex and fragile it looks. Although it's kept all the astronauts and all the cosmonauts safe for 20 years. We just had that anniversary. So
yeah, that's right.
But these are about 570 pounds apiece, and you can easily imagine that any of those would be catastrophic. So this is one of the two big concerns that we see out of this, and there's another one that's coming up here in a minute. Is there more we should say about this, do you think, Derrick?
Yeah, the only other thing I'll say about this is, International Space Station looks great here, and it looks nice and sturdy. It's about the size of a football field, but it is incredibly fragile. And one of the concerns that engineers and operators have is if it were to be struck, and of course it is struck by micrometeoroid impact, but if it's struck by anything of any size, it can be incredibly damaging. And we've known for quite some time that even very, very small mass objects traveling at very, very high velocity, at orbital velocities, can cause quite a bit of damage. So it doesn't have to be a gigantic piece. It can be a very small piece traveling at a very, very high rate of speed that can do significant damage. So just imagine what something 500, 600 pounds could do if it were to strike something like International Space Station.
And your point is very much a part of the next couple slides we'll look at, the other problem that would occur. Right?
Let's go there.
I think a little foreshadowing there. So one of the things that can easily happen is that they can collide with each other. There's only one International Space Station, and so the probability of collisions is worrisomely high to us, but it's not nearly as high as the probability that the 20,000 of them and the 100,000 that are up there could collide with each other. That's really a sensitive issue. So it turns out these rings that we described earlier, we'll see an image of it in a minute, these rings are in multiple planes, along the degrees of longitude, so that everybody at whatever longitude you are has satellites that are passing over you close by, so you can make a good connection. It's not really with a cell phone, but you can make a good connection. So wherever they intersect, that's a very dangerous place where they could crash into each other. And they also pass through lower layers of active satellites, because the satellites come in several layers in order to have enough space to put them all in.
Mm-hmm.
So these dense rings, the debris fragments from early collisions could result in additional collisions, just as you talked about, providing large numbers of spraying fragments that could occur. And these could hurt the International Space Station or any one of many other satellites that are going to share that space. So here's that picture that I promised you. This shows you what it would look like. Here we have a ring of satellites at a particular longitude, and then next to it, at the next longitude over, we have another ring and another ring. And the Starlink ones, for example, go up as far as 53 degrees north latitude, not all the way to 90, but enough to cover almost all of the Scandinavia and places like that that you'd want to cover, and down to 53. And you can see all these places where they overlap, where they intersect. And these intersections are actually intersections of satellites passing by at very high velocities. So they could easily have collisions, especially with the decaying ones that don't have much of any control. I should say that I did not have time or budget to produce a beautiful drawing like this myself. And so if you look at the bottom, you say it's repurposed. It actually shows the final orbit of the NASA UR satellite before its uncontrolled reentry. And it was quite a big unit, and they were quite worried about where it was going to come down. And I believe it actually did come down before it got to Los Angeles here. But the previous orbit passed over Chicago and Moscow, I think.
Oh, so, wow. Okay. Some
were,
high-value targets there, you could say.
Yes, you could have had a lot of international trouble if that had.
Yeah. Oh, yes. No, that's true. Right.
Just the subject you were talking about earlier. So this is a big deal, and this is the thing that looks like it's the highest probability problem that we see, and then that can lead to the problem we're going to talk about in the next slide. Is there something else I should have said about this, you think?
No, the only other thing I'll mention about this really quickly for those that are looking at this, sometimes images like this of course, can be a little difficult to interpret just because of the way in which the mapping is done. So we have what's being attempted in this kind of image is you're trying to put a three-dimensional situation into a two-dimensional surface. And so when Ken talks about these rings, if you follow any one of the yellow or blue lines, if you were to map these around a globe, you'd get a ring. But because it's on a flat surface like this, it looks like the wave that you see.
Yes, thanks. And of course, you see these images. We've all seen these with things like space shuttle launches at the Launch Control Center. It looks very much like this at the Cape with that very large screen that they have. So
yeah,
much the same thing. Well, the problem that can happen from this, once they start to interact and they start to have big plumes of debris from collisions, that can cause more collisions. And it turns out this is not a new idea. So this has a name. It's called the Kessler Syndrome, and the idea is that an initial collision creates a cloud of debris of large and small pieces, and then these clouds of debris collide with additional satellites. And if there's enough satellites up there, which there have never been in the past when constellations were small, then it could lead to a runaway chain reaction of a lot of collisions. And this was thought of by a NASA aerospace engineer named Kessler in 1978. And in those days, a big constellation was 6 satellites. And so he was way ahead of his time.
Wow.
He did a great job looking ahead on that. But he came back in 2009 and did a retrospective on it. And he said he was worried that the large constellations that the Department of Defense was then thinking of, still much smaller than these, were big enough that they might trigger the Kessler Syndrome. So that was in 2009, he was beginning to get worried about that, and he's not commented on how this works since then. But these clouds could prevent any further use of low Earth orbit for a long time, perhaps several years. There are even people have looked at it who say 100 years, but that seems far too long. Seems like
Wow.
they wouldn't stay.
Wow. So here we have a situation where you have one satellite collision that occurs that creates a bunch of fragments that are now traveling along at this very, very high velocity. And so now these fragments can strike other satellites that would create more fragments traveling at that rate of speed. And this is that chain reaction that could possibly happen if we have enough satellites in orbit.
And the movie you referred to earlier was Gravity, right?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for mentioning that. Yeah, well, as I said, if you've seen the movie Gravity, if our audience has seen the movie Gravity, then they have some idea of what it looks like when objects collide and create thousands of other fragments. So we don't need to go into whether or not the physics represented in the movie was correct or anything like that. I know a lot of people have some issues about that, but that scenario or that scene, I think pretty well describes what you're talking about here with the Kessler Syndrome.
Yes, and as you say, there were plenty of odd Hollywood choices about space in that movie.
Yeah, well, yes, of course.
But it did make the point. So for my part today, there's only one more thing to talk about that, and that says, what should we do about this?
Yes, please. What do we do?
All right, so let's take a look at that. So there's not a lot of possible solutions for it that we know of. And we may talk here for a minute about some of the tests that people have made. They're all pretty expensive. They're all kind of slow. But here's the possible solutions. You could greatly reduce the number of internet satellites. That would require them to be bigger and have bigger antennas and transmitters. And then as users on Earth, we'd also need bigger transmitters because we'd have to look out further. They wouldn't be as close to us if just as if you made a lot fewer cell phone towers. You could design them so they have more rapid deorbiting at end of life. You could save more propellant. You could put a big rocket motor on them. All that adds expense and weight. Third, you could have redundant systems so that you didn't get the failures in orbit. If one failed, you'd recognize it. And related to that, right below it says a watchdog timer and a backup control. So this would be a control system that would be just a deorbiting control system, kind of like rockets when they're launched, they have a destruct system. It's a completely separate system, and it watches to see if it looks as if the rocket is going to head towards someplace that's a populated area. And if it sees that, it takes over control and destroys it. This would be the same thing, a watchdog timer to watch if the computer is not talking to it, and a backup control that only does deorbiting. Sounds pretty expensive, and it might fail once in a while and deorbit a good satellite. But there it is. And the last one is you could have buddy or cleanup satellites in each ring. You could require people to put a cleanup satellite in each ring, and it could pop along and find the ones that were end of lifing and deorbit them. It could have the only big rocket motor on it. So each of these methods is feasible, but you can see it adds cost and complexity. We haven't talked about, and I didn't put in here the fact that you could build a whole system to go remove the space junk, and people have tried a lot of efforts at that, and it's challenging. It's very challenging. But once the space junk gets there, it's a lot harder than taking the satellites down.
Wow. Well, this sounds like a serious situation that we need to look at pretty carefully, because I mean, it's a great idea to have these internet constellations that can provide low-cost, high-quality internet access for people all around the world. But on the other end, this really could be a serious problem if this were to actually develop. So, and I love the idea of the different ways in which we might be able to solve this issue or mitigate this to some degree. I think there's a wonderful business opportunity for someone to come up with a system that might help to do this. But Ken, you look at this kind of stuff all the time. How do you think about this? I mean, do you think this is an inevitability, or there's a 40% chance, an 80% chance? How do you think about the reality of this happening?
Well, it turns out there are several people around the world who have worked on models of this. They've looked at models of, for the existing set of satellites, the 3,000 dead ones and the 2,000 active ones, things like that. And today we're seeing a lot more problems of that. You may know that the International Space Station is having to move aside much more than it used to. It's already this year, it's moved aside 3 times. And just in the last couple of weeks, Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, pointed out that it's had to move again with great urgency because there was a very close one. There's a professor named Moriba Jah at University of Texas who has online a test effort to look at how close the near collisions are to satellites at all times in real time. And you can look that up online. I've done it recently, and it's a little scary. There's a lot of pretty close encounters.
Wow. Wow. Well, it's a pretty sobering thing for us to keep in mind when we're outside looking up at the night sky and we actually see satellites. And, we do talk about viewing satellites here on the program, Ken. And, one of the things I mention every so often is that, anytime you're outside under clear, dark skies, there's a very, very good possibility that you're going to see a satellite as it crosses the sky. International Space Station in particular, of course, is an obvious one because it's so nice and bright. But it's actually, I would say that anytime you're out under clear, dark skies, if you're out for 10 minutes or more, you're probably going to see a satellite while you're out there. And that's just one of the many thousands of either operating satellites or pieces of space junk that are out there. Now, as we're looking, we can add these internet satellite constellations and think a little bit about what their end-of-life situation is going to be and what might happen as a result of that.
Yes.
What else should we be thinking about this, Ken?
Well, you may know that there's been a lot of concern by astronomers that this large number of satellites will cause bright flashes and streaks across their images. And the astronomy community's had a chance to take a look at it, and for many ordinary single look images, it won't be a big problem. But we're coming to a point now where a lot of the nice new efforts that are being made, the new programs, are surveys. And they're surveys that run all the time and take pictures almost at video rates to show changes in the sky. And especially one of those new telescopes that's being built in South America looks as if it's going to be seriously impaired, and it's a sort of $500 million project. So finding ways to reduce the brightness of them is for people like us and our listeners who care about astronomy. That's another issue.
Yeah, you're right. That's another effect that wasn't taken into account when either those telescopes were being designed or when the satellite systems were being designed, the new constellations. Ken, I want to thank you very much for joining us to bring us this information. While this is a serious issue, I don't want us to think that there's absolutely nothing we can do, but we do have to pay attention to it, and we do have to figure out some ways to solve this problem. And we have the capability to do it, but we just have to want to do it.
There are a lot of bright people starting to think about this.
And that's a good thing because, again, I don't want to have to walk around with a titanium umbrella. Thanks again, Ken. This is Ken MacLeod, who's an engineering manager in Southern California, who's worked for a number of different companies as an engineering manager. He's had vice president roles at a number of different startups in Irvine, California. He's now retired from corporate roles. He works independently, and he is actually originally from the Philadelphia area and got his degrees from Ursinus and Penn, and also a master's from Stanford in electrical engineering with an emphasis in computer science. And he actually has 4 US patents. A friend of the Franklin Institute, a cousin of a friend of the Franklin Institute. I want to thank Dan Amoroso for connecting me with Ken. Thanks a lot, Dan. Greatly appreciate it. And Ken, thanks a lot for being with us, and hopefully you'll join us again sometime in the future.
Yeah. Thanks so much, and thanks to Dan too from me.
So just hang on there, Ken. Let's see if we have any questions from our audience related to this.
Well, we have a number of questions. Does the number of 100,000 satellites include satellites from other countries?
Yeah, Ken, the
I
question
have
is,
a question for Ken too.
yeah, the question is, of those 100,000 satellites that you talked about, they certainly include satellites from other countries as well.
Yeah, well, certainly OneWeb is a British company. They're headquartered in Britain and now half owned British. And I didn't mention the other half owner who bought them after their recent reorganization is Bharti Airtel, which is one of the very largest providers of cell phone service in India. And so you might argue that that company is now half British and half India. So yes, indeed, more than just the U.S.
Great. Okay, well, thanks again, Ken. We greatly appreciate you being with us. We'll catch you again soon.
All right, thank you now.
Okay. Well, folks, the next time you're outside looking at the evening sky, you might want to consider what these satellite constellations of satellites look like. In fact, you know, being able to see satellites is not so difficult, as we've mentioned a number of times. And, you know, we've talked about different websites that we can use to help us find our way around the sky. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to grab my computer and bring it right over here so that we can actually take a look at what is available in the evening sky right now, including satellites. So if you'll bear with me for just a moment while I make a little switch over here. It'll just take a second for me to do this, and I'll be able to bring my desktop up so that we can actually look. There we are. I think I've got my screen shared here. Okay, so great. Here's what we're going to do to begin with. While we're on the topic of satellites, we're going to run right out here to one of my favorite sites that I use for viewing satellites. And it's this one, jamesdarpinian.com's site, See a Satellite Tonight. You recall that I've shown this on screen before as a program that you can use to tell you when you can go out to take a look at satellites. Right now, it's compiling the information about what's visible right here where I am. And you can see over on the right-hand side of your screen what looks like the inside of the Franklin Institute. That's a great site. Thank you very much. But what it's actually doing is it's using Google to figure out exactly where I am. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in another location here so that it will know where to look for satellites right near, generally speaking, where I am. And hopefully the zip code will be enough for that. But one of the things it will also show you is it'll show you when you can see those strings of pearls of satellites. And as you can see, it says no telescope is needed for this. So I highly recommend that you just do a search for See a Satellite Tonight. You'll come to this particular website and you'll be able to see what satellites are available at any particular time. So this is right outside, right around my neighborhood here. And it shows you that International Space Station at 4:40 a.m. Would be visible tomorrow. And there's a number here. I'm going to go down just two options here. This is for 6:18 p.m. And you'll notice that it has this number over here on the left-hand side in the blue box of 29 times. So that's 29 satellites that are coming across in this string of pearls. Thank you very much, Ken, for that description. I really like that. And it shows you where the string is passing by relative to your position, looking down on Earth. But it also shows you on the right-hand side of the screen where you could see these if you were just looking up into the sky from your location. Now, I've just used a zip code, but you can actually put in your street address, and this will actually use Google Street View to give you an image of what your street looks like and where the satellites are available, where the satellites can be seen relative to houses on your street. So that's a really convenient one that shows this really nicely. And so you can even get information about this particular group of Starlink satellites as they're flying by. All right, so let's just switch out here because we have a couple of things we want to try and get done before we come to the end of our program this evening. You know, the other thing that we said we wanted to do was we wanted to go outside and just take a quick look at the evening sky, what's available to be seen as we look at the sky. And of course, you know, my favorite program for doing this. Oh, how about that? Isn't that interesting how that just came up like that? So here's what I'm going to do. Rather than use this particular one, I'm going to use the Stellarium that's on my desktop right over here because that will work just as well too. I don't want to fish around in this program and try to find something so quickly. Here we are. I think I have what I need here. Let me just check my date to make sure we're, there we are, right time. And this is 10 p.m. Just a second. There we are. Okay, here we are. So what we have here is the southern horizon is right around in here. And as we look up from where we are right at this time, which is, again, 8:45 p.m., this looks like where we are right here. We can see if we look up into the southern sky, here's Mars right over here, easy to see in the south. And you can see that over in the southwestern sky, Jupiter and Saturn are just about to set on the southwestern horizon over here. So they're beginning to set earlier and earlier because they've been around through the summer season and into the fall. And so they're beginning to slide out of the view, while Mars is still in a very, very good place in the sky. I'm just going to enlarge things a little bit here. And I'm going to bring in some constellations just so you can see where they are here. I'm going to start just with the constellation lines right here. And so as we look at the constellation lines, now we can see where the planets are relative to these constellations. I'm going to bring us back a little bit over to the southwest here, and I'm going to add the constellation names. And while we have a lot here, I just want to highlight a few that run right through this portion of the sky from up at the top here, coming down past Mars and through on over to where Jupiter and Saturn are. And the reason why is because you'll recognize these constellation names of Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries. And if we were to continue on in that direction, we'd end up past Aries over at Taurus, and we'd continue on past Taurus over toward Gemini. And you'll recognize these names because they are the names of the stars, of the constellations that we find in the zodiac group of stars. And that zodiac group marks the path of the sun, moon, and planets across the sky. So as the sky is darkening in the evening, just after dark, and you can see Jupiter and Saturn, I invite you to do this activity. Go outside, spot Jupiter, large, bright, creamy colored. And I want you to draw a line that goes from Jupiter through Saturn right next door and continues across the sky over to your left and comes through Mars. Well, if you do that, you will have plotted out that line, that path along which the planets travel as they orbit the sun. Now, the Earth is in that line as well, but since we're on the Earth and we're looking out into space, that line seems to be up in the sky away from us. Well, think about it this way. We're on the other side of the sun, looking back into the evening sky, seeing the other planets along the other side of that line as it's come around the sun. So these are the constellations that are available right now in the evening sky that you can see without any difficulty at all. Very fine constellation right at the top of the sky in the south right here, or halfway up the sky in the south, I should say, is your main constellation of the fall. It's the Great Square of Pegasus. And these four stars that you see right here in the center of our view mark the Great Square of Pegasus, and that makes this constellation easy to find. It's a great one to use because not only will it point you down toward Mars, or if you like, start with Mars and come up toward the Great Square of Pegasus, but it also connects you to another really fine constellation that's great for us to see in the fall, and it starts right at this star we see here. This star, by the way, has a name. It's called Alpheratz. Alpheratz. And Alpheratz is a connecting star between the Great Square of Pegasus and the constellation Andromeda. Now, that's a good one to know because if you can find that square, you can actually find the only spiral galaxy that's visible to the naked eye under dark, clear sky conditions. Now, if your conditions aren't quite so dark, a pair of binoculars will help, but it's a simple path to get there. So if you start at Mars, come up to the square of Pegasus, and take this top corner star over here, all you have to do is count out from here 2 stars along the chain, 1, 2, and then count 2 stars above the chain, 1 and 2. And right here, right at the end of that second star, is that galaxy. And that galaxy is easily visible under dark, clear skies. If you live in Center City, Philadelphia, it's worth a trip out to some place where the sky is clearer and darker so you can see what this galaxy looks like. So that's a good one to look for. I highly recommend that. That's a great one to do if you're out under the evening sky looking.
Can't see your screen, people.
Oh, I understand you can't see my screen. Okay, sorry about that. Let's see if there's another way I can make that happen. I'm going to try this again just to see if it will do what we need it to do. Aha, I see what's happened. Okay, just a second. Here's what I did, folks. I have to bring my shared screen to the front. So what I'm going to do here is I'll see if I can do it about like this. And okay, hopefully that worked. And if it did, I'll have some constellation lines here. Oh, yes, I see. Now, hopefully you can see my screen now. And if you can, I'm looking at a starry sky in Stellarium. What I just described was starting at Mars, moving up to the great square of Pegasus, going from this corner star up 2 stars along the chain, and then up above the line 2 stars out to where the galaxy is. This is the spiral galaxy in Andromeda, which is easily visible under dark, clear skies without binoculars.
I don't think they can see it.
Oh, I'm sorry, folks. I'm having some difficulty getting that to show up. So I'm sorry I can't do that for you, but let's move on to do, here's some my other sky. Let me see if this one is doing what we need it to do. Hold on, let me try my screen sharing again here. Just a second. And now I think we have this. Okay, so let me try that one more time, folks. Thank you for your patience as I try to get this to come through for us. So now I'm using Stellarium-web. That's the online version. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is come around to the southern portion of the sky, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring those constellations back up. Here we can see Mars right here below the constellation Pisces. So we can go from Mars up to Pegasus.
Yes.
We have the 4 stars in the box that mark the great square of Pegasus. I understand you are seeing this now. Thank you very much. And if we take this star right at the corner, top left corner of the box, we can move out along the chain of stars that are part of Andromeda. 1 star, 2 stars, and then up 2 stars, 1 and 2. And we'll find the galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy, right here in this portion of the sky. Again, easy to see, pair of binoculars, clear dark sky. Okay, along with a number of other fine constellations that are available in the fall sky. You can dig up this map and use it yourself so that you can see that. Okay, so great. I'm glad we got a chance to see that. So let's move on because we have a couple of other things we want to try to pull in here. International Space Station, if you'd like to get out to view International Space Station, and let's see, here we are right here. I'm going to see if I can share this screen with you. Okay, International Space Station will be easily visible now in the pre-dawn sky. I've pulled up a map, as we can see here right now. This is a map for Saturday morning at 5:30. There are 2 really good passes coming up, Saturday morning and Monday morning at 5:30. This particular pass shows that International Space Station becomes visible first at 5:28 a.m. and then as it disappears from the sky over at 5:35, it passes right past Venus. So if you happen to be up that early in the morning on Saturday, this would be a great thing for you to look for. The skies are supposed to be clear, so it'd be a great observation to make. The other observation that I mentioned for Space Station that's good is 5:30 on Monday morning. There's another opportunity for you to see International Space Station, and you can use the See a Satellite program to look for that one as well. If you're interested in evening viewings, Evening viewings begin around the 15th of the month, and there'll be some fine ones in the evening sky that you'll be able to see without too much difficulty at all either. So let me see if I can do just a couple of questions right now. We'll see if we have a couple of questions while I switch over to the next little thing that we want to try to get done.
Well, Lauren has an 8-year-old who would like to know how our meteors form.
Lauren, I understand you have an 8-year-old that's very, very interested in meteors. You know, there's a tremendous amount of stuff out there in space that actually, I should say it like this, there's plenty of space junk out there that is flying around in the solar system that makes up the meteoritic material that we see falling into the Earth's atmosphere. There is a meteor shower that happens every November called the Leonid meteor shower that happens around the second week of the month. And the Leonid meteor shower is at one of those that's easy to view. And in this particular case, the Leonid meteors are material left over from the melting of a comet that's orbiting the sun in our solar system. So as that comet orbits the sun, the nucleus melts, material, dust and gas come out of that nucleus. And as the dust falls into the Earth's atmosphere, as Earth passes through the dust tail of that comet, or the dust path of that comet, we see these objects falling into the Earth's atmosphere. We identify them as meteors. Well, they are material that's left over from the beginning of the solar system, Lauren. And so your 8-year-old can go outside and see these on almost any clear night. On any given night, you can count as many as 10 meteors as they fall into the Earth's atmosphere. But on a night where you might have a meteor shower like the Leonid meteor shower, that number might increase to 20 per hour. And for some showers, the Geminid shower, for example, in December, that number can reach over 100 per hour. So lots of great stuff to see out there. We will always have meteors because there's always plenty of natural space junk that's still flying around in the solar system left over from the beginning. What's another question, Linda?
9-year-old Akima wants to know, will the sun ever go boom, and will a white hole ever appear?
9-year-old Akima wants to know if the sun will ever go boom. Guess what, Akima? The sun will eventually go boom, but not for a very long time. Our sun has at least 5 billion years left in its current state, so we don't have to worry about any major changes happening to the sun for at least 5 billion years. After that, though, it's going to take another few 100 million years for something significant to happen. And once that does happen, will a white hole develop after that? No. Unfortunately, our sun is not big enough to create even a black hole. We've talked about those in the past. So our star is not one that's going to have a very spectacular end of its life. But we don't have to worry about that for at least another 5 billion years. Another question?
Oh, absolutely. Is the decaying impact on our solar system, is there a negative impact on our solar system from decay?
Is there a negative impact on our solar system from decay? Not decaying satellites. A little hard to figure out what it means?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, Elon would like to know, if we take hydrogen from the sun and decrease its mass, will it extend its lifespan?
What a question, Elon. The question that Elon has is, if we take hydrogen from the sun, thereby decreasing its mass, will that make the sun last longer? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Wow, what an interesting question. Yeah, you know what? I can tell you've done a lot of research on this already, Elon. And in fact, one of the things we know about stars is that the stars that last the longest are the stars that have the lowest mass. So our sun, we think of it as an average type star. But if you have a really, really gigantic, very, very massive star, it burns its energy much, much, much faster and has a much shorter lifetime. Stars that start out at a very, very low mass with a small amount of hydrogen live much longer lives. There are plenty of those stars in the sky. They're called brown dwarf stars. And these stars have such a low mass, Elon, that we can't even really see them easily.
they don't glow bright enough for us to see them really easily with a regular visible light telescope. Oh, we can use a fancy infrared telescope that senses heat, and we can find them. But those stars are so cool that they will last much, much longer than our star will. So theoretically, I suppose, if we could pull hydrogen out of the star and reduce its mass, it could last longer. I think it's going to be a tricky project, though, to try to remove hydrogen from our star currently. But why don't you think about it, Elon? Maybe there's a way something like that could happen. There's a future project for you. Okay, we have to do just a couple of, can we do another question?
Oh, yeah. 11-year-old Mary would like to know, do solar flares degrade satellites in orbit?
Mary, 11 years old, wants to know if solar flares
degrade satellites in orbit.
Yeah, that's a great question. Do solar flares degrade satellites as they orbit the Earth? Well, actually, one of the things that solar flares do, they do a couple of things. Solar flares, the electromagnetic particles that are ejected by eruptions off the surface of the sun, can do damage to the sensitive electronics of satellites. But one of the things that happens when there's increased solar activity is the atmosphere of the Earth heats a little bit more, and that heating causes the atmosphere to expand, and that expansion of the atmosphere then causes additional drag on the satellites, causing their orbits to decay maybe a bit earlier than originally anticipated or planned. So that can happen. And so we do monitor what's happening with the sun's activity so that we can figure out what we might do to prevent additional damage to the satellite or to correct an orbital decay situation that may have come because of a large solar flare. Great question, though. Thank you very much. Let's see. We have time for another one, I think.
Okay. Well, this was a question for Ken, but maybe you can answer. Are there presently any agencies that track satellites in orbit?
Yeah, this would have been a question for Ken, but I think I can answer it. The question is, are there agencies that are actually tracking satellites in orbit? Oh, yes. Satellites are very, very carefully tracked by not only the countries that launch them, but by international agencies that follow satellites and keep track of them. So not only is that done officially through the countries and the agencies of the space agencies of the countries that launch them, but also, you know, radar, how can I say this? We keep track of all of those satellites via radar so that we can know where they are at all times. And it's really important to know where they are so that collisions can be avoided when possible, and also so that we know what's going to happen to these satellites as their orbits decay. We need to keep track of them. So yes, we do keep very, very close tabs on the satellites. Now, sometimes the space junk, individual pieces of space junk, might be harder to keep track of and know exactly what they are. But we do our best to try to keep up with them. And in this way, we know how many pieces, or have some estimate of how many pieces are actually up there at any one time. Okay, so I know there were a couple of last things we had to do to clean up here for our evening. So let me see if I can get through those pretty quickly. One of the things I wanted to mention to you was about holiday gifts. If you're thinking about doing astronomy holiday gifts, I have some places that you need to check out. One of them is this location that I really like to work with, and it's a group called Orion Telescopes and Binoculars. Orion Telescopes and Binoculars is a West Coast operation that has a really, really great business at providing telescopes, telescope accessories, and any kind of astronomical observing equipment you can think of. Now, this is not a commercial. I mention them because I think they're a really good company that has a lot of great equipment and really great prices for their equipment. So I'd really recommend that if you're thinking about a holiday gift in the telescope realm, this is one of the places you check out. If you just go to telescope.com, you can jump onto their website, and there's so many ways you can sort the information they have that will help you figure out what's best for you. So I highly recommend you check them out. But there's one other company, and it's a local one that I also like to recommend, and it's this group called Skies Unlimited. Skies Unlimited is right here in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. You can give them a call and check and see what hours they have right now during the COVID situation, and find out if you can go to their showroom and actually see telescopes that you might be interested in purchasing as a gift, or other kinds of accessories or astronomical observing equipment. So we have a local group right here, Skies Unlimited, really great bunch of people who know what they're talking about, as well as the Orion telescope group that has so much material as well. So there's lots of options for you to check this sort of stuff out and figure out what's good for you. I think that's most of what we were planning to do for this evening. We talked a little about International Space Station being available. We had a great presentation with Ken talking about what happens at the end of life and the Kessler Syndrome. Don't forget to purchase our titanium umbrella, by the way. We talked about what's available in the evening sky, a little bit about constellations, a little bit more about planets that you can see in the evening sky. It's a really great time to get out and do that. And we also talked about the change in seasons and how that affects our time of observing. So I want to encourage you to get outside and take a look at the night sky. While the sky is looking really good these days, just a couple more points I'm going to finish up with here, just to make sure we get everything in. You know, the Franklin Institute is open. If you haven't been there yet, we really want you to come see it. What we've done is we've set things up in a way at the Franklin Institute so that you can have a really, really safe visit. It works out really well. We have this modified museum experience that's designed to celebrate science in a safe and welcoming environment. Right now, we have the President's exhibit by Madame Tussauds. I highly recommend you come check it out. It would have been really, really great to see last weekend over holiday weekend. That'll give you some idea of what it's like, but you should come check it out. It's really cool. We really prefer if you would buy advance tickets. Just go online, go to our website, and you can purchase your tickets there. Everybody and members included, we ask you to go online and purchase your tickets. There's no online fees, of course. And as it is with everything else these days, masks are required. And we do have enhanced cleaning protocols at the Franklin Institute to help keep you safe. You can visit our website at www.fi.edu to learn more and reserve your tickets. And you can also check out other Franklin at-home programs online at fi.edu. Don't forget, you can follow me on Twitter at @CoolAstronomer. I'll give you daily and weekly updates on things. We'll ask you to stay safe out there. Don't forget, wear your mask. Social distancing is very important, and we want you to enjoy November and enjoy the November skies. Go outside tonight. The sky is clear. Take a look up and see what you can see. Make your connection with the evening sky. Remember, this is your universe. Get out there and explore it. Thanks a lot for joining me tonight, folks. We'll be back next month, the first Thursday night. We'll get into everything for December. And don't forget, if you have additional questions that I haven't managed to get to during the program tonight, don't worry, I'll get to them online and answer your question. Don't forget, you can also reach out to me if you have questions, specific questions about telescopes, what you think you might want to purchase. If you need some help or guidance there, drop me a line and let me know. I'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for joining us. Again, thanks to Ken, thanks to all of our producers. Thanks, Linda, for your help. And enjoy the evening skies. Enjoy November. We'll see you again next month.